Hi, welcome to this extra module that I'm adding in this year called Should I Break Contact with My Narcissist? The reason doing this module came to me is having watched a lot of the questions going on in the last couple of weeks in the Facebook group and in the comments. I've seen this question come up a lot, and I think we touch on it a little bit in the previous modules of the course, but I thought it's actually worth giving it its own module because should I break contact with my narcissist or from this toxic relationship is a question that I don't think many of us answer easily or quickly. I know for myself, and I was kind of reflecting on this, there's always that period of time where you're not sure and your mind goes, well, what if they transform and what am I losing? And so I thought there are underpinnings to that question. There are emotions, attachments, stories that are the weight in that question, the gravity. And equally, I know that many of you, it can be family members that you're asking this question about, and that's a tough one. That's the toughest. It's easier to walk away from a friend, a romantic relationship, or even though there is some financial risk or career risk, perhaps walking away from a toxic employer or boss. Family members is hard because in our culture, the general idea is that you're supposed to have contact with your families. And even though I'm sure, like me, you've known many, many people in your life now who perhaps don't speak to a certain family member or have walked away from their family as a whole, there is still this sense of taboo in society as to walking away from a family member. So I know that in the bonus interview we did this year with Marty, we talked a little about this, so you can check that out. But I also wanted to just give us a chance and an opportunity to let's dig under a little bit this question and start to identify some of the things that hold us in this question. Should I break contact with my narcissist? Things that hold us feeling uncertain, but also asking yourself the question, who would I have to be or become in order to successfully maintain contact with my narcissist? So let's get started. First thing to ask yourself, and this is really important to write down, even those of you who are like, I don't like writing things down. I get it, but I also want to remind you that when we write things down, when we put things on the page, when we type things on the screen, we're starting to move out of the head, which can be very covert in the way that it works. An insidious thought here that you might forget 6 hours later that led you to an action. When we actually write these things down, we give ourselves the opportunity for our eyes and our awareness to grow, because you see what you've written and it's like, oh, okay, that's what I think. So this act of getting it out and through the body and onto the page or the screen is vital. So the first thing to ask yourself, if you're in this question or this quandary, and maybe you aren't in contact with your narc, but it feels still a little emotional or intense for you that you've walked away from them, it would be good for you to do this exercise just as another layer of healing. Ask yourself, what is my attachment to this relationship? What is my attachment to this relationship? So meaning, what are the things that I don't want to let go of? What are the things I'm holding on to? So I'll give you a few examples. It might be, she's my sister. We used to laugh together a lot. When she's in a good mood, she's great and she's the most fun person to be around. So you don't need to judge any of these things. Just write down as many as there are and don't panic if there are 30. This exercise isn't about making you walk away from this person. What we're actually doing is having a very true examination of, is this a relationship I need to keep in my life? Is this a relationship I need to stay with? So use the space on the worksheet to write out a list, as many things as you like, of what is your attachment to this relationship, this person. The next part is very similar to what we just did, and it kind of comes at it from a slightly different angle. What are your objections to ending this relationship? What are your objections to ending this relationship? Now, some of those things may be exactly the same as the attachments, but the objections will reveal some other elements too. There will be other things that you framing that question in your mind will help you unearth. So now write out a list of what are your objections to breaking contact with this person or ending the relationship, and let that list be as long and as detailed as you need and want it to be. Okay, and now we're going to go back over the attachments you wrote down to this relationship and the objections you wrote out to breaking contact with this person. And you're going to ask, are any of these things I've written valid? Now you may say, well, what do you mean valid? And I'm like, well, again, this is a in-the-moment exercise using your own senses, your own awareness, your own feelings, your own thoughts. You're going to go down that list and you're going to put a tick or a cross by these question points. So if you think that your attachment to this person is valid, put a tick. If it doesn't feel very valid to you, if you read it and you're like, we used to laugh 5 years ago when we were younger. Yeah, we haven't actually laughed for 5 years, so I don't think that's valid in the now. Cross. Now, if you've done this on the screen, you might want to use an asterisk or a star sign as the yes and a cross as the no if you need to do this on a screen. But go down each point on your attachments and your objections list, and you're just going to put a tick by the ones that feel true. Yeah, she's my sister. That feels true to me. That's valid to me right now. That's a valid point. You're going to put a tick by that one if it feels true and good and right to you in this moment. But if it's one that you read and you're like, no, now I read that back, I don't get a strong feeling in my body about that one, I'm going to put a cross by that one. That doesn't feel valid in this moment. It's just an exercise, so try not to take it too seriously, try not to stop yourself, try not to judge yourself, try not to panic. You can do it again tomorrow and you may get slightly different results, but today this is just to give yourself permission to assess this list of attachments and objections and see which are still valid today. The tick for yes, that still feels valid. The cross for no, that doesn't feel valid. And if you're on computer, use an asterisk, the star sign, or use an X for no. Okay, so please don't worry if that exercise was really hard for you. If you're sitting there going, oh God, I couldn't do that. So a couple of reasons it could be hard. Number one, you might be still in this relationship and still in the early stages of healing. As you've heard me say before, this thing takes time and it's layers. And it takes us time to get ourselves through the layers to a place of space or clarity so that we can have healing. So don't worry too much about your results. I want you to just be present with me in this video, and even the fact that you're here doing this is great. You're just moving the needle inside yourself. But it may also be not just that you're at an early healing stage, that this really is one of your biggest questions right now. And it's one of the things that you're struggling to find clarity on. Should I break contact with this person? So what we're going to look at now is going to give you a slightly different framing for choosing to stay in contact with this person. So if you're confused, you'll apply this in the now. And if you've already made your mind up and you're clear, this might just be something that sharpens your awareness around new people who come into your life, those new friends, employers, lovers, potential family members, whoever they are. The thing about this pattern is once you start to see it, and once you start to own and heal your part in it, it doesn't go away in your life, but your entanglement with it does. So like I've said before, there might be someone who comes into the room or into your life and you're like, oh, years ago, I would have just let this person do all the talking, and when they said they'd had a lovely time with me 2 hours later and they left and I felt drained, I would have said yes next time they asked me out for dinner again. But now I see the imbalance in the dynamic and I no longer need to play in the dynamic. That's how the healing and the awareness work, we gradually over time heal inside, grow our outer awareness, and that's how we change these patterns that we have found ourselves caught in. So this next piece is going to be an interesting way for you to look at, should I stay in contact with my narc? Let's assume you're going to stay in contact with your narc, and perhaps that's very much what you're hoping. Perhaps you're here hoping that we can figure this out. So there are 3 selves to consider, 3 selves to consider. And I want you to consider each of these 3 selves as who you might need to be to stay in the relationship, or what you might end up experiencing if you stay in the relationship. The 3 selves are selflessness, self-neglect, and self-abuse. Selflessness, self-neglect, and self-abuse. Because for you to successfully stay in contact with this identified narc or imbalanced relationship in your life, one of these 3 is going to have to show up. You're either going to be able to say, you know what, she's my sister, and I want to have a relationship with her, and I don't want her out of my life. Can I become selfless in my relationship pattern with her? Can I become okay that she's going to take up all the room in the relationship and that there isn't much left for me? Can I allow that to happen? Can I get to a place where it's so important to me to have her in my life that I'm willing to be selfless in that relationship? And some of you, that may be the truth. You know, I know some of you might be thinking, oh, that sounds awful. But for some people, this might be the truth. You might have reached such a state where it's like, I don't really care what she does or what she says. I'm just happy to see her, and that's okay. I'm not asking for anything from her. I know who she is. But I will throw this caveat in. To successfully be selfless in a relationship dynamic like that, you also have to have boundaries. So you being successfully selfless in the relationship with your narc going forward, you're also going to have boundaries. You're also going to be able to, in yourself, if she says something wounding, to have just written her off around all those wounding comments. Never letting them touch you. Go, oh, she's just wounded. Doesn't touch me. I'm actually clear that that doesn't bother me. She can't get in here anymore. And I just kind of ignore her when she does that. That's a boundary. Or perhaps your boundary comes through your words. You will be selfless on the condition that your sister or whoever it is can no longer verbally belittle, betray, judge you. Perhaps that's the place that you can reach. That's the compromise. That's the move that she can step toward so that you can have a mostly selfless relationship with her and be at peace. Okay, so that was number 1. Number 2, this is where we start to let go of boundaries in the relationship. We go down to self-neglect. Self-neglect is when we're having an experience where we're going into deficit. So you might hang out with your sister and she's like, oh, I love seeing you, let's do it again next week. And you come away and you manage to not be perhaps triggered or get into a fight, but you can feel that you've lost some energy. You're in a bit of a deficit. You're already beginning to, you kind of neglected yourself in a way that was detrimental. And your sister or your person neglected you in a way that you've come away and feels like you weren't really allowed to be there, and it doesn't feel good to you. That doesn't feel right for you. It doesn't feel right for you in this relationship. It doesn't feel right for you at this time in your life. Again, remember, there are no hard and fast rules. We're all going through stages of relationship and stages of growth. You can only make the decision in the now for the now. So self-neglect is the compromise that you might be making to stay with your narc or your person where the imbalance exists. So ask yourself, I'm thinking of the person that I'm still in contact. Is it Am I successfully selfless with them and I'm happy to be that? Not really. I'm kind of in self-neglect. There's a deficit because there's always something that kind of chips away at me or doesn't feel good, and I'm not able to speak to them about it because I've tried and it doesn't work. So now I either just have to be in self-neglect or choose not to see them. The third and final self that I asked you to look at on this scale of where are we and who are we having to be in order to maintain this relationship? Self-abuse. So self-abuse is the worst. It's when we are choosing to stay with someone in our life and we are aware that we are being abused. We are feeling abused. We're aware that the way that they're treating us with words, with actions, physically, is abusive and is not treating us with respect, with love, with kindness. So then we're in a self-abusive, maintained relationship. And that's really the worst, the most chronic. I know many of you will already have been identifying that for yourselves coming to this course or perhaps coming through this course. Your eyes have opened. You're like, oh my God, that's actually, I didn't realize that I'm allowed to not live with that verbal abuse. I didn't realize it was verbal abuse. I just thought he'd had a bad childhood. Join the queue. So it's not about our past justifying our now. It's about our now being something that the people who are around us fit with. And you may be realizing that the narcissistic or toxic behavior that you've been on the receiving end of, you no longer fit with. You feel compassion for them. You feel compassion for what they've gone through, and you really hope that they can transform genuinely. Perhaps you're leaving with resentment, perhaps there's some hurt, perhaps there's some wounding, that you wounded me, and you're never going to hear them apologize. So you're going to have to go off and heal that by yourself. And then you'll realize, you wounded me and I let you wound me, and I let you wound me over and over again. So I was angry at you, but I was also angry at myself. And I also want to make sure I'm not angry at myself or in deficit in the future. So I'm going to figure out what the warning signs are around this, so that I don't come into a self-abusive relationship again. So, when thinking about should I keep in contact with my narc, ask yourself, if you were to keep in contact with your narc right now, which of those three selves do you think you would experience the most? So, you might say, actually, I think I could experience that selflessness that you spoke about, and that's worth it to me. There's stuff there, I only want to see them 3 or 4 times a year, but I want to see them, and if that changes, it changes in the future, but right now, I can do the selflessness thing. I've healed enough, I've let go of enough, and I also have enough of a boundary that I won't let them abuse me, and if I go into self-neglect, if I start to feel a deficit, I'll leave. Very fact that you said I only want to see them 3 times a year already tells me that you're mindful of your deficit. You're mindful of how long you can go without oxygen. And that's managing the relationship. So there's a level of management in all 3 of these. I'm not going to dress it up. It's not like suddenly it's this transformed euphoric relationship. But if it's worth it to you, the selflessness option will be where you want to go to. And that will involve committing to your own healing, keeping going with healing any wounds that you've had from them, continuing to understand why they do it, continuing to make peace with the fact that they may or may not change, but making sure that you change, making sure that you develop a new side of yourself that can help shield or protect you from anything that would tip the relationship into abuse. So self-neglect is the next one, and I imagine a lot of you might be in this middle place. It's like, well, it's not super abusive, and I've kind of managed to kind of ignore some of the stuff, but I do feel drained the longer I'm there. So ask yourself, how can I self-neglect less when I'm around this person? Is it putting limits on the amount of time I spend with them? Putting limits on the amount I'm available for them? Is it making sure that I'm speaking my truth when I'm in their presence? I know they might not like it, But if I'm starting to suffer because they've just said something that's very opinionated and judgmental and it's kind of hanging in the room, it might not be about you, it might be about someone else. And you say, actually, that's not the way I see it at all. I think she's quite nice. I just think she's having a bad day. I don't judge her in that way. If you can do that, if you can bring yourself into the relationship and you're not being asked to play small, then there will be less of the self-neglect. There will be less of the deficit. So that's going to be something to look at if you're in that, I have to self-neglect in order to be around this person. So you're going to want to bring more of yourself into the relationship to see if that person is willing to allow it. And if they aren't, or if they push back, or if they push you out, then you're going into that territory of, oh, this isn't good for me. This isn't good for me. Or I'll just be selfless and I'll deal with it. But for many of you, if you're in that gray area, it's pretty unlikely that you will rise to selflessness. And last but not least, self-abuse. I mean, that one is fairly explanatory. We are self-abusive when we put ourselves in and around abusive people. People who are willingly and regularly, repeatedly mean, unkind, aggressive, violent towards us, whether that's emotional violence, physical violence. So which self do you think you would be if you want to maintain contact with this narc? Would you be selfless? Would you be in self-neglect? Or would you be in self-abuse? Now, of course, there are lots of subcategories, but I felt like giving you this scale of 3 will be useful for you to kind of find your position, because you need to understand where you are if you want to maintain this relationship. You need to unearth what in here is wanting to stay in contact with this person that another part of me is identifying isn't healthy. And that brings us to the next part of this module. This is a fairly obvious underscoring of what goes on for all of us when we're worried about breaking contact with someone. But sure, there are societal programs running, beliefs about family. Oh, I couldn't get divorced because no one in my family has got divorced. You know, all of those things. Or I can't leave this job because will I ever find another job? Well, the answer to that is if you aren't ready to find another job, start looking elsewhere before you leave. Start creating your exit plan. Start putting the feelers out, seeing what's around. It's all about moving ourselves out of the victim state. And one of the biggest states that underscores us feeling like victims, there's a lot to being a victim. There can be many reasons, many emotions, but one of the things I just want you to consider is abandonment. Our sense of being abandoned by or abandoning love or a connection, a person, a thread. So attachment and abandonment are 2 things to really look at when you're struggling to let go of an unhealthy relationship. You know, it's classic for many of us when we get into our first love relationships, you know, in our teens, 20s, 30s, whenever that was for you, that we tend to go through much of the family healing that we spoke about with Diana Edwards in her interview. You know, we come into those first relationships to heal our emotional traumas that may have come from our family or have come from our soul. You know, we may have carried a whole load into this life with us that we're carrying, that's in our makeup. And when we go into those first romantic relationships, the reason that for many people there can be a lot of push-pull and dramatic endings and tears, and it's this intensified experience of love that you're focusing so much on one person. But the actual truth of love and connection is everybody. We were in Costa Rica, I think it was last year or the year before, and there's a channel which will be out there on a recording. I forget which one it is. But the Z's said that if we lived more tribally, none of us would care too much about romantic love or one person. And they weren't trying to in any way say that our close connections with a partner or a best friend or someone who you consider like your family, who isn't your family by blood, they weren't saying those bonds are bad, because they were saying that through those relationships we experience the world. But they were saying that the way our society has been organized, if we lived more tribally, we wouldn't care so much about the special one relationship, and that often so much weight gets put on one relationship in that way. So the reason I bring that up is equally the idea of separating a relationship or pulling away from love or a bond, whether that bond is because it's your workplace or your family. It can really scare us. It can bring up the fear of, oh my God, what if I'm on my own, or I'm abandoned, or there's like a terror or a fear. There's something in the body that goes, don't do that, don't do that. So this is partly why we get into this question that you're processing right now in this module. Should I break contact with my narc? Perhaps you already did and you're just curious about learning some stuff in this module. It's the idea that if we lose this person and we lose all of this, we will have lost. And what we forget is that when we let go of something in our life, we leave room that wasn't there before for something else to come in. Now, sure, I think the things get stacked against you as you go through life. I think the older you become, that there is a tendency for people to think, well, how will I meet people? I'm recording this during the middle of COVID. So, we're all much more limited in how much we can interact with each other. So I also understand that can be an intensifier for people this year who are thinking, well, I want to leave this relationship, but then I'll be alone. The thing about being alone, when we have periods of being alone or years of being alone or a life of being alone, is you come to develop a new understanding of yourself, your presence, and what you need. And we have this fear of being alone that kind of runs through the psyche, and that's often underpinning this idea you're only focusing on what you're losing with this person. You're not focusing on what letting go of a half full glass could lead you to. This half full glass of water, it's half water, it's half oil, and you're drinking the oil to get the water. But if you can let go of that, go through the grief process, heal, recover, you allow yourself to, at the right time, 3 weeks, 3 months, or 3 years later, find a very full glass of water that is actually very good for you and your cells and your body and your spirit. So if you're struggling with this question and you've gone through the list of what am I attached to? What are my objections to walking away? Who would I have to become? Just try and understand that it's natural for any of us to worry about what we might lose. And if that's really bothering you, it would be helpful to focus on the future at the same time as an exercise. So to write a list of all the qualities of relationship that you would like to experience next. Even if you're letting go of a family member, you can't replace someone who is blood family, but if you're no longer speaking to your sister once a week, twice a month, twice a day, however often it is, you will leave room for someone else to come in. And when you've adjusted to her not being your person anymore, you then will come to a point where the new person can come in. So, very important thing to sit with and consider whenever you notice there is a weight in you around letting go of somebody and opening up to a different relationship as a result. Last but not least, give it 6 months. If you're in doubt about breaking contact with somebody, a really healthy thing to do, and you may tell them this or you may not tell them this, just keep it to yourself, take a break from them for 2 months, 4 months, 6 months. But if you give it 6 months to break any relationship, to have a period of time where you're not in contact, it can really help to allow a transformation to happen when you come back together, if one is possible. Because both of you have broken the pattern and the comfort and the reliance enough, and for a long enough period of time, that when you come back, people can't just safely lean on the old patterns, because the old patterns led you to have a break in relationship. So if a transformation is possible, it often happens because those who are very enmeshed take a break for a period of time and then come back together after a little healing and a little reevaluation. So if in doubt, give it 6 months. If the idea of walking away forever feels too much to you, give yourself a time in your mind where you're like, actually, I could do 2 weeks. That's about as much as I could do, Lee. It feels weird to me to. So great, either tell them, phone them, text them, email them, whatever you want to do, but say, hey, I'm not going to be available for the next 2 weeks. And if you don't feel ready to talk to them about the why, or you don't think it will be well received, you can put it on you and you can say, I'm just going through quite a lot of stuff and I'm going to go quiet for the next couple of weeks and try and limit how many conversations I'm having with people. You do what you need to do for you. But if what you need is to give yourself a short period of the experience of not having the relationship in your life, then do that. Hope this helped, and big love.